John Wesley. Is this on? Can you hear me okay? Yes? We're having sound system gremlins again, so bear with us. These seems like speakers are cutting in and out, but I promise it's life in a beautiful old building sometimes. So we like the old building, we don't like the challenges of it. Anyway, John Wesley, you know John Wesley, right? Do you know who he was? Heard of John Wesley? He was an Anglican priest, a priest in the Church of England in the 18th century. He actually came over to the colony of Georgia to try to do some mission work. It apparently didn't go all that well, and so he returned to England. And as he was returning back, apparently, he realized that there really was something to this faith, that he had this experience of knowing in his heart and soul that he was saved, that he was loved by God, that it was going to be okay. And it wasn't just sort of an intellectual assent to this. He had this experience of that presence of the love of God. And he went back to England wanting people to have that same experience. Whether they were in church or not, he wanted them to have that experience. So he started recruiting people to go out and share this experience and invite people to come to know what it might feel like and be like to know the love of God in that transforming kind of way. So he did this kind of alongside the church. It eventually became Methodism, or the Methodist denomination, although he didn't leave the Church of England. But it eventually became that. But he had all these people that he wanted to go out and share this good news. And he said, I need people, this is apparently a quote from him, I need people who are ready to preach, pray, and die at a moment's notice. Those are the people he wanted. Now, does that sound like a job announcement you would respond to? Ready to preach, pray, and die at a moment's notice. He wasn't talking about people who, had gone to seminary and learned theology and all that. He wanted people who had this love of God, who could simply share their story about God in their life. Who knew when the occasion came, they knew that by God's grace they'd have the right words to say to someone, to invite them to consider what it meant that God loved them. He wanted people who cared enough for other people that they would enter into their lives, share their pain and suffering and hurt, pray for them when they were struggling. And he wanted people who, even if they weren't actually at risk of their very life, knew that there was nothing in this world to fear if they were following the ways of God. Who knew that even if there was a cost to pay, maybe they might be socially ostracized or financially maybe not as well off or something like that, that the value of knowing that love of God in their life was so far surpassed any cost that might come up. So the way he put it rather bluntly was he wanted people who were ready to preach, pray, and die at a moment's notice. Now Jesus says, that wasn't Wesley, that wasn't original to him. Jesus says basically the same thing in this gospel, maybe a little more eloquently as the evangelist recounts it. But Jesus says to his disciples, I'm going to Jerusalem, and I'm going to suffer and be handed over, and I'm going to be put to death, and in 3 days rise again. Now, Peter knew that wasn't the plan he signed up for either. That wasn't a job announcement that he got. And so he says to Jesus, you don't need to die. We've got your back. We'll protect you. We've got work to do. We're not going to do it that way. And so tempting was it, even for Jesus, I think, to think maybe there was a way not to have to risk one's life. And he knew that wasn't right, so he says, get behind me, Satan. You're not on God's side. And then he turns and he says, let me put it another way. Anyone who wants to follow me needs to take up their cross. And he said, anyone who wants to save their life will lose it. And anyone who loses their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. In other words, Jesus wants people who are ready to preach, pray, and die at a moment's notice. There it is. And he goes on. I love the last sentence in this. He says, those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them I will be ashamed when I return. Now basically what he's saying, and this is not the only place Jesus says something like this, he says, look, you're smart people, you can make your choices, and I will honor them. So if you, when the time comes, want to disavow knowing me, then when the time comes, I will respect your choice and disavow knowing you. He says something similar somewhere else where he says, you can forgive people who've hurt you or not, and I will honor your choice. If you forgive people who've hurt you, I will forgive you. But if what you want is to hold on to everything, bear a grudge, keep track of everything someone's done to you, and make sure everyone knows it, I will honor that choice and I will do that with you. Now we could have, at another time, talk to Father Burrell or Father Thomas or Canon Elizabeth about this, not me, but you could have a theological discussion about free will and grace and all of that and how those work together. But there are places like this where you take it at face value. Jesus is saying, if you want your faith to just be your own thing, and you're not going to be willing to share this with other people who need to know the love of God, if you're going to hide it, you might not find me when it's time. So it's why, this is part of why a couple of years ago, 2016, not that long ago, it was actually the vestry of this church, when we were looking at where we were going and what we needed to be about and where we felt God was leading us. It was the vestry that said, we need to get serious about talking about evangelism. We actually need to be a community of faith that is comfortable with and understands how we share that love of God with others. How we can, as a stately, dignified, proper Episcopal Church, be evangelists. And we knew when we had that conversation, we knew there's for a lot of people some dissonance between those, right? Because proper, stately, dignified Episcopal churches don't, go out and knock on doors or stand on street corners or any of those kinds of things. It's not what we do. And it's all too often that we think that the opposite of ashamed in this gospel probably looks something like that. We worry that the opposite of being ashamed, of actually sharing our faith, might be judgmental, arrogant. It might mean being kind of religious bullies, which we've all seen. The people who say, unless you think exactly like I do, you're going to hell. And we think and we all think, rightly so, that if that's what it means to be evangelists, no thank you. But I will tell you, for Episcopalians, that's not what it means to be an evangelist, but we can still be evangelists. It actually is possible for you and me, when the moment is right, when we're connected with God, we're nurturing our life of prayer, we're worshiping together, we're learning the Bible and learning more deeply what our faith is like, that occasions will arise in our life when we're faced with someone who really does need to know and want to know what the love of God and Jesus means to you or to me. And we actually do need to be ready when those moments arise to talk about that and to say to someone, this is life-changing. It has filled me with joy and a peace beyond understanding, and I want you to know it too. Would you come with me and check this place out? And we don't have to knock on a stranger's door, and we don't have to tell someone they're going to hell if they don't come to church with us. Thank God. We don't have to do that. But we can actually commend the faith that is in us. We can take seriously that vow that we all made at our baptism, that we talked about last week, when we're asked, will you proclaim by word and example the good news of God in Christ? We actually can do that in ways that have integrity for us as Episcopalians. So I think the opposite of being ashamed of Jesus actually does mean sharing our faith. And there's four characteristics that I want to suggest might be what our ways of sharing our faith look like. And I actually heard this at a recording of the Evangelism Matters conference that was put on by the Episcopal Church. Yes, you heard that right. The Episcopal Church put on a conference about evangelism for Episcopalians. Isn't that amazing? This is a great thing, friends. This conference happened about a year and a half ago, and it was so... They had twice as many people sign up as they had capacity for that conference. It was so popular. People are longing, actually, like our vestry started stirring about needing to do this. People are feeling like there's more to this than just me and Jesus. There are actually people I care about in my life, and I want them to know what a difference this makes, and what a wonderful community of faith this is. And they might actually find some deeper relationship with God here. How do we do that? How do we do that as a community? So the Episcopal Church put this conference on. It was so full, they're doing it again in about a couple of weeks in scenic Cleveland, Ohio, which is good because then we know people will focus on the conference. We actually, Ken and Elizabeth, right? Ken and Elizabeth and Beth Cole, our senior warden, are going to that conference. So we can all thank them for taking the time to go do this for us because they're going to help us learn about this. But in a recording of this woman sort of summarizing this conference that I heard, she actually quoted the source of all knowledge on the internet, Wikipedia. Right? Now I know. But actually sometimes there's good stuff on Wikipedia. And on the page, she pointed out that on the page that talks about evangelism, it says that these conversations when we share our faith are characterized by 4 things. And I think this is a good opposite of being ashamed when we listen to this gospel today. 4 characteristics: clarity, fearlessness, graciousness, and respect. Now, we Episcopalians can do that, can't we? I'm not sure about clarity all the time for me, but I try with the others. But think about that. So when Jesus says, look, don't be ashamed of me. Be ready to commend this faith that's in you. Be ready to reach out to someone who's hurting and be with them in their pain and draw them into that love of God. You can do that. And we don't have to be that sort of stereotype that doesn't sit well with most of us, of being sort of arrogant and self-righteous and judgmental and kind of a religious bully. We don't have to do that. So this is what I want us to do this week, friends. When we take this gospel home and we consider those words of Jesus, this is kind of a challenging little passage with Jesus there. And much as we don't like Wesley's summary, Wesley actually gets it right. And he says that on some level, if we're following Jesus, by God's grace, we don't have to want to do this on our own. But by God's grace, we'll be ready to preach, pray, or die, figuratively speaking, at a moment's notice. And I want us to pray this week about what it would look like just to ask God for the grace to be even just a little more comfortable when the time comes, when the moment is right, and we know that God is moving in a conversation, to share with someone how much it means to us to know the love of God in Christ, that it's actually changed our lives. And you and I can ask for the grace to have those conversations characterized by those 4 things in that wonderful Wikipedia article. We can have those conversations. We can commend the faith that is within us with clarity, fearlessness, graciousness, and respect.